Five.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you're listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable podcast. This is podcast number 628. My name is Eric Nelson, and with me today, I don't have a co host. Both Corey and Matt are out today. Corey's kind of sick, and Matt is out visiting customers. Today is Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. I'm happy to be here. We have some beautiful weather in California right now. It has been cold, it's been in the 40s. So for California, that's pretty brisk. From I hit it 32 last night, all the way up to 45, 50 during the day. So brisk winter weather, kind of fun because Christmas coming. On the show today, my favorite topic: VMware Fusion 13 Pro and the Workstation, a new release. And we've got Michael Royd here to talk about it. Maybe you've heard about it already, but pretty excited because I'm a big Apple fan, and I've got new Apple ARM processor, as many of us do, and I believe Fusion is there. So we're going to talk to Michael Roy about that. In the news, as always, we got done with VMworld. Or what should I say, VMware Explorer, and put a quarter in the cup for every time I say that. We got back from Europe, and we were excited to get the rest of the year going. So one of the things that's happening is congrats to the VMUG leaders who are going to Lisbon next week for the VMUG Leadership Conference. I know they rotate through all the VMUG leaders once every couple, 3 years. And so I think we're going to have 100 leaders in Lisbon next week talking about everything that's happening with VMUG next year. Excited about that. Excited about the Broadcom acquisition. Still, hearing things about them investing in enterprise and community programs that engage with people. So a lot of excitement there. Broadcom is all about working with enterprises and encouraging more consumption. So I think they're going to be doing less lead gen marketing and more engagement marketing with the products that you're consuming. So I'm excited about that. And they have come back and they have started to work with VMUG. They're working with us. And it looks like we will have a happy acquisition if that goes through. So excited about that. Excited about working with VMUG at the leadership conference next week. And then excited about, I think there is next week, there is a multi-cloud briefing. So if you haven't paid attention, you can go to vmware.com and register for the multi-cloud briefing that's happening next week. They're going to, I think Victorio is going to be talking about our latest multi-cloud strategy and doing a brief. He does briefs every quarter. So that one's coming up next week. Then I think on the radar, there is a VMUG Virtual User Con sponsored by Microsoft and cloud computing, where they're going to be talking about vSphere and VMware products in Azure, and that's going to be an online event in mid-December, so go look for that one. And then next January there is Spring One. So Spring One has gone from a physical event in San Francisco. They pushed it back, and they're going to be doing a virtual event on DevOps topics, Spring One topics, come mid-January. So you can look for that one and go register for that one. So I think those are the main events that are coming up. And then we're going to be doing a 12 days of Christmas like we did last year, but we're going to be doing 12 days of Christmas home lab. So if for all of the experts that have their Max Tangs, we have some really good examples we're going to be highlighting there, things that you can do with your Max Tang. And then with their VMUG is sponsoring a Max Tang package for VMUG Advantage people, where you're going to get Advantage for $180, which gets you the vSphere 8 licenses as well as a Max Tang. So they're bundling all that up. I think it's going to be like $400, and you can get a home x86 Nook. Got a great processor in it. What we gave the vExperts. So if you're not a vExpert, you listen to this, or you didn't register in time, if you want to spend $400, you can have your own home lab Max Tang and follow along with the 12 days of happiness. So with that should be fun. So looking forward to that. And I think that's it for the news. So let's get over to our guest here who's patiently waiting. Michael Roy, good to have you back. As always, exciting times in the land of Fusion and Workspace. How's it going? Tell us the elevator pitch. How long you've been at VMware? What do you work on?
Oh man, it's good to see you again, Eric. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. All the support over the years of
but we do on the desktop here. It's goes a long way. Really do appreciate it. I think the community appreciates it too. So,
Yeah.
because these are popular tools used by millions. It's nuts. This little side project at VMware almost. So who am I? What do I do? Michael Roy. I manage the VMware Fusion and VMware Workstation lines of business. Sometimes I'm doing product management stuff. Sometimes I'm doing product marketing stuff. Sometimes I'm writing code, and some of that's shipping in the product right now. So it's really fun. I get to kind of spread myself around and work on different things at different times, and depending on what the product needs, and set direction and strategy and make sure we're sort of pointing in the right direction. I've been doing that since about 2015. I came from the vCloud Air team, where we had built some integrations on Fusion and Workstation to actually like take VMs and upload them to the cloud and stuff. So that was really cool. 2015 I came on and ended up sort of leading the team from there. But I've been with VMware since 2009. I actually started in the Fusion and Workstation support team in the Burlington, Ontario, Canada office. Shout out to my Burlington peeps who are still around. And
Nice.
yeah, so it's been a part of my career my whole since Fusion 1.0 came out. I remember testing it back in when I was first gotten a Mac way back in the day. Because when they finally switched over to Intel, it was like, oh, cool, they're using a processor that like everything else in the world uses. This is great. And now that's changed. That's a whole nother discussion, and that's why we ship Fusion 13.
I remember that when I first ran into you, right, and you were talking about stuff, I was like, man, this young kid, he's so sharp. He knows everything about all the stuff. It's like hipster, cool, young, sharp men. The world is yeah. Now I look at you and I go, wow, you're a little bit older now, right? Like you're 10 years older now. Like
I
that's
got a couple of
how
grays.
life goes, right? Yeah.
Getting my Doctor Strange temple grays are coming in, and
yeah, there you go. You'll get used to it, right?
It's carrying the weight. It adds 10 years to your life.
People ask me that. They're like, yeah, should we have this old thing come back? And I'm like, yeah, we should always bring old stuff back, because I'm kind of like, I like old stuff, right? And I like consistency and longevity, right? And so, like, do I want the old lights on my Christmas tree? Yeah, I do. The old ones that blink and that are big, that use real
those
power.
Old fire hazards. Yeah,
exactly. You have that risk of burning your house down. That's just that's part of Christmas, right? Like, and so it's kind of cool because Fusion Workstation have been here so long. They are reliable, and you don't know how many people reach out to me because I'm a VMware guy, so they know that, and they're like, hey, I got this new M1 and Fusion doesn't work, right? And we got these things we run on Windows that we don't. We upgraded everybody in our company. We got a stack of now M1s that we had to put over in the corner because we can't use them because we can't run that one Windows app, like a chip design app or something like that, where everybody was using that. But then they were using their Macs and they were excited to upgrade. So finally, over time now, we're at the spot where things have changed. So why don't you take us through kind of that change, and then you can also talk about Workstation, however you want to approach it.
Yeah, we'll get through Fusion, and then we can address Workstation, and we'll pepper it in as we go too, because there's a lot of things that we do that support both of them, right? Like
both,
Windows 11, right? Because we had to do a ton of work to get Windows 11 to work, because all the system requirements went up for that. So we had to adapt and adjust, right? But also running on a different processor, and there's this whole other problem of Windows themselves. They support one ARM processor, and it's a Qualcomm Snapdragon, and so they haven't been as I would say openly helpful as they have as with the on the x86 side, where you can easily download ISOs and everything else, right? So it's been a journey. And a lot of ambiguity along the way, but you know what? We listen to our users. We listen to
and that's because Microsoft is in the hardware game, and the ARM Surface uses a particular version of that CPU. So you can see where they might drag their feet a little bit because they're in that space hardware wise.
I mean, I don't want to presume what their motives are,
Right.
but we do know that right now customers are confused, and at the same time, we weren't willing to march forward with the full force of VMware behind us without the certainty that we were going to do this in a way that was sustainable and kosher, basically, right? That they were going to be happy with. And so, getting through all of that stuff, it's been a 2+ year journey. We did part of it before the transition by switching around how Fusion itself sort of behaves, in that it uses the Apple hypervisor frameworks instead of our own kernel extensions. So that helped us do a lot of the work that we needed to have done to do that transition anyway. But a lot of the stuff that we built into Fusion and Workstation is shared code with ESX. So we actually used a lot of the ESX ARM project team to do this transition. So we had a tech preview early last year, then we had another one middle of the year, and then finally this year we had one late last year, and then we had one middle of this year, and then we had another one update in September, just get the final sort of bugs that we needed to exercise out of it, and then we shipped Fusion 13 just a couple of weeks ago, and so it's been a lot of trials to get there, because not only do we have to work with what we're doing, but the whole industry is sort of moving. It's a moving target, right? And we're trying to like line it up, and it's all this like plumbing and back end work that's also sort of moving pretty quickly, right? So for example, getting Linux to work and Ubuntu on ARM, there's ARM variants, there's stuff that's built specifically for Raspberry Pis and whatnot.
Right.
But there's not a lot of like generic ARM device ISOs, because there aren't a lot of CD-ROMs for ARM devices right these days. And that's of course what the ISO was originally designed for, to write onto a CD drive, to a disk. And so folks like Ubuntu, if it's not standard operations for them to release the kind of things in the kind of ways that we would need to consume it. But working together, there's ways that we've been able to forge a path forward, right? So with like Ubuntu, for example, there were some kernel bugs that we had fixed in the kernel itself and in our graphics driver stack and things like that, that we just needed them to sort of pull in. So for a lot of the time during the tech preview, versions of Ubuntu didn't work. So for example, 2204 and right, and there was older versions that definitely didn't work, and newer ones that somewhat worked, and depended on what version of Mesa and the kernel and everything that you had and tools, and so everything was sort of a moving target. But thankfully, everything sort of aligned. Fedora 37 shipped, Ubuntu 2210 shipped. They've got all the support that they need out of the box, including VMware tools on ARM and on Intel, of course. And so yeah, it's been a lot of work getting there, and it's been a lot of collaboration with the community. We'll file bugs with, vendors, with Mesa, and we'll fix bugs and submit code to libraries where we needed to, like like I said, in Mesa in the graphics stack. And then finally, it all sort of coalesced, and we were able to move it forward. But we couldn't have done it without the support from, I would say, both the ESXi ARM team, but also ARM Incorporated. So we actually worked together with ARM doing this, and you get a scoop because I haven't told we haven't really marketed or announced this yet here. But we work with ARM in developing Fusion specifically to be compliant with a standard that they're promoting called System Ready. So ARM Inc. has this thing called System Ready, and they have various degrees of it. And ours, Fusion 13, is certified for System Ready VE, virtual environment. What that means is all of the plumbing and all of the low-level stuff, like the ACPI stack, the USB stack, the XHCI controllers, all this like interrupt addressing and like low-level stuff on how a motherboard assembles and firmware works. The problem right now in the market is that vendors that are trying to develop systems using these new chips, there's no standardized process, so they can implement their own custom solutions using the licensing that they get from ARM, and then they build a solution that might not look exactly the same as the next vendor's solution. So the System Ready essentially says, so this is what we expect an ARM system to look like within a set of parameters that operating system vendors and application vendors can work with. And that means basically you build your app for a system that is system ready, it's going to work on another system that's system ready. You build an operating system for hardware that's system ready, it's going to work on another piece of hardware that's also system ready. That's the goal. And so Fusion presents a hardware profile, a virtual hardware profile, to an operating system that is system ready compliant. And so we went through a battery of tests, worked back and forth on bugs and things like that. And we got to the point where now ARM's gone ahead and they've published our certification. We're going to be publishing the stuff that we need on our end in the next couple of days, weeks. It's a big enterprise. It takes a long time to do some of these things sometimes. But it's fantastic to have that, because it means that you can use Fusion as a test bed and as a development platform for this new emerging, sector of devices, all these ARM edge devices, these even server products. As long as they're system ready compatible from an operating system's perspective, they'll work. And that's, it took a lot of low-level engineering, and I want to give huge shout-out thanks to the ESXi ARM team and some of the folks who helped work on that to make it happen, because without it,
Yeah, there wouldn't just
It
be a standard that the hardware guys could build to.
Right. So like we'd have to talk to Ubuntu and be like, okay, we need you to do these things. And then at Fedora, we'd have to say, hey, we need you to do these things. We have to basically ask each vendor to behave. Or we would have to say, hey, when you're installing Ubuntu, do it like this. And we're installing Fedora, do it like that. And then you have all these deviations and all these like, cases. And that just adds complexity and unmanageability to our code. So it
Yeah,
made sense for us to do it both from a development perspective, but the users get such value out of it that they know that their systems are going to work, right? I think that's the real
it's
benefit.
actually it's really interesting from a history perspective and computer science lesson, because that stuff automatically happened with Intel, right? Like you had Intel and AMD, and somehow the BIOS that IBM built way back when defined conformality to the or conform.
Yeah, it's like the ISA standardization process and the PCI standardization process. They weren't like government bodies, but they were just a group that everyone decided, hey, listen, this is what an interrupt bus is going to look like. This is what a PCI expansion slot is going to look like. And then way hardware vendors and motherboard vendors and software vendors can all just work on the same the same page. And
And I
in
feel
this
like
new era, it's been tough because you have all these ARM. The current dominant ARM use case is around mobile devices,
Mobile
right?
phones,
And tablets. And so, those are very closed systems that are trying to solve unique problems that are in their domain space, right? Like a phone has a different problem than a server in a data center, right? So yeah, it's been a journey and it's still ongoing, but I think we're going to see a lot more of these ARM devices emerging, and I think Fusion's going to be a way to help folks build applications that are going to be Intel or ARM derived.
ARM derived, yeah, and so that came together. So ARM itself helped drive that process. ARM Inc. Right in the UK, I think somewhere out there. That's where
I mean, their headquarters is in the UK, but
they're all over.
The folks we were talking to were in San Jose.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay. Right. But that's my son works at Roku, and they do stuff over there. They're based on ARM. All the Roku devices are ARM, so they have a group that sits right next to ARM Inc. in UK, right? So I know that it's out there, but it's interesting. Yeah. So that came together. I would have lost money on that bet because, I was really excited when we had the original early access Fusion that would kind of work on the new Macs, but then there was just all kind of things, and we just never seemed to get Microsoft and Apple. There was also Microsoft had to support an OS, right? An ARM OS that would behave, right? And then licensing, and whether they would even license it on anybody else's machines, right? So somewhere, I guess Microsoft must have come together as well and decided that they could license on Apple Gear or something. Right?
I don't think they've quite got there yet. I think what they're seeing now is they're probably listening to a lot of demand coming from folks with these needs and these devices. I don't think that the tide has turned yet. I think there's still ambiguity out there and it's unaddressed. But I do think that will eventually erode over time, one way or the other. I think the internet routes around problems, and I think that that's just what good engineers do. Is they need to figure out a solution for it, and they'll go left, they'll go right, whatever is going to get them to their goal, right?
When originally ESX hypervisor showed up, Microsoft had to kind of was dragging their feet and playing games there too with licensing, and so eventually everything came to pass, right? So
yeah, and it's tricky because companies inherently have a motivation to maximize shareholder value, right? Like at the end of the day, they got to do what's going to provide the maximum return, right? And so there's some anti-competitive stuff, not anti-competitive, but there's some competitive action that happens that you want to protect, and that's perfectly valid. And I think it's just in today's world, we've learned that it's better when there are open ecosystems and there are open lines of communication, and when we have those things flowing, everyone sort of benefits, and that's why I think open source software is sort of taking off so much, because it imbibes those values. They're baked into how software gets delivered, right? Like if I could open source Fusion and Workstation tomorrow, I would, but it's ESX and running on a desktop. I definitely can't do that. But I believe so much in the ecosystem and what that level of interaction and that level of community brings. It creates a sum that's greater than or a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. I also think that Satya Nadella, is that his name? Yeah, for Microsoft CEO. Like when he took over, all of a sudden Microsoft started to embrace Linux as well and open source and put Linux inside of Windows 11. And I think they started to be a little bit more flexible as well. And then they acquired GitHub, which is also, targeted engineers and generically open source. And so I think they've broadened their horizon a little bit as well. So maybe that's helped.
Yeah, it's definitely been an evolving situation, right? Like Microsoft being the big bad from back in the days, now like baking Linux into Windows, right? In a sense, and it's
Right.
like, wait, what's going on here? And they've developed a hypervisor platform that we on Workstation consume, and there's APIs for us that we can run when things like Hyper-V are going, as opposed to just not, right? And so it's been, I think it's evolving, right? And we're all realizing that coming together is better than putting up walls.
Yeah, I think they recognize that if they went full on war forever, they might lose. like in the end,
Just
right?
like nobody wins, right? Is that the world we want to live in, where everyone's just always just like trying to get the
Trying to
most
win.
dollar that we can get, and out of any way that we can get it? Like, that's not the world that I am trying to build with technology, right?
So anyway, happy news is that new Fusion. What is it? Fusion
13.
13.
For those
Now
Triska
will run
decaphobics out
on-
there, it's gonna be great.
Will it run on my M1 and my M2, or is it M2?
Yep.
What is
It'll run on your M1, your M2, and your Intel Mac. It's a universal binary, so it actually has both the Intel and the Apple Silicon version in the same DMG. So what's great for that is, like, from a download perspective, you just go to the same place as always and download it. But from a delivery perspective for big organizations, you can just still go through the same workflow and package it the exact same way. So,
and then it's just a single license, right? So you just get
single
the
license, yeah.
across everyone.
And so that same license for personal users is what we did with Fusion 12 and Workstation 16, was that it could work on up to 3 devices, and those could be Mac, Windows, or Linux devices, which means that your Fusion 13 Pro license works for Workstation 17 Pro on Linux and on Windows. And so, yeah, commercial users are 1-to-1, so you need 1 license per device that you're working on in a commercial setting. But personal users, that 1 license key can be applied to up to 3 devices. And like I said, the same key works on Mac, Windows, and Linux, Workstation, and Fusion.
3 devices simultaneously. So, yeah, nice. Oh,
Yeah,
good.
exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's pretty nice. They had a Black Friday sale also. So
We did, and it was 30% off, and now we're offering, we have currently running a Cyber Monday sale, Cyber Week sale, so that's like 20% off new licenses. Upgrades are $100, basically 50% off the new license for folks who have one of the existing versions that qualify, so 12 or 11.
Yeah, so $100 gets you Fusion license for 3 platforms. Away you go, good shape, right? And Cyber Monday, 20% off or 10% off or whatever it is.
So the name of the game this year was, of course, Apple Silicon, but really it was Windows 11, and it was making Windows 11 just sort of work everywhere. And in order to get Windows 11 to work, Windows 11's system requirements are a little bit higher. So we had to do stuff with the sound device. We had to do stuff with the trusted platform module. So we needed a 2.0.
I was going to say, they get into security stuff now that makes it a little bit harder. Yeah.
Right. So they basically make Windows 11 require a trusted platform module, which for folks who don't know, it's a tiny little chip, like it's a secure enclave, they call it. And it's basically a little security writable space that has some encrypted, contents on it. And that's like, a key and things to secure the system and uniquely identify the system. And so with virtual machines, that requirement doesn't go away. And so what we did was we already had a TPM device, but the way that it worked wasn't specifically just to run the OS. It was for like an enhanced level of security. So we required the VM to be encrypted because the space that the TPM wrote to needed to be encrypted.
Right.
Right. And so the problem with doing the full encryption is that you end up having this performance penalty because the VM has to be decrypted when it's running, which, means it's going to suspend and resume slower. It's going to be a little sluggish here and there, doing some file operations and things like that. So
vSphere on the enterprise has had this, right?
vSphere does things a little bit differently because they have like a central trust authority and they have keys that are sort of managed via vCenter. Whereas we don't really have that on the desktop, right? So the way that we had to engineer and organize around that was using the local system resources for doing key management and having that remember, right? So there were basically 2 parts to it. One was, like I said, managing the keys, and the other part was changing the encryption so that instead of encrypting the entire volume of the virtual disk, all the files, what we do is we only encrypt some of the memory space and the memory files. And so the snapshot space that the memory that gets written to disk when it suspends or when it's actually running is only this tiny amount. Instead
Okay.
of like
Right. The
128
whole
gig
thing.
disk,
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
4 gigs of RAM or 8 gigs of RAM, whatever. And so now we're only encrypting that. And so we call that fast encryption. And then the other part is on Windows, we're using like the Windows Credential Manager. And on Workstation Linux, we're using the Linux System Credential Manager. And
And
on
on
Fusion, we're
Fusion,
using Keychain. And so what that basically means is the decryption password automatically gets saved into the system, and that way the user doesn't need to remember it, because it can be you can set it yourself if you want to have it protect the VM, or you can just have the system remember it so that it satisfies the Windows 11 requirements. And you can use this for other VMs too. It doesn't have to be Windows 11. If you have a security need, you can turn the TPM on. If you have a Linux VM that needs a TPM for some reason, it'll work.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about Fusion. I'll ask one other question, then we'll go talk about Workstation for a little bit.
Yeah.
So, in the Fusion space, any kind of cool features that you look at and go, "Oh, this is," because all we're talking about right now is like how we got it to run on the new M1 or M2. It's like anything that you look at and go, "Oh, wow, 13 really did some interesting things." I know for a while we were talking about Kubernetes and the being able to do dev, focusing on developers who want to build communities. Any kind of things like that you look at 13 and go, that was innovative.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because a lot of that work has been done just to keep things working. It's been a year that
The
we were
answer is no.
well, we were really disrupted, right? Like both the industry and a lot of stuff going on that I won't get into. But at the same time, the team was able to focus and was able to make sure that these products stayed alive and that these products continue to perform well and that they're secure and that we're fixing, like we, for example, we had a 0 day just before the release and we had to, quickly adjust and adapt. And so a ton of work has to go into just keeping the lights on, if you will. And so, I definitely see now that that's sort of done and, hopefully some of this ambiguity about the potential impending acquisition, once that starts to settle, things will be better. Like, not, I won't say things will be better, but even better than where we are potentially. Because we do see a future around developers, right? We do see that. And so we've been doing a lot of internal work, a lot of POC work there that just didn't end up seeing the light of day. So I don't want folks to think that we didn't do anything, because we spent like a whole year and then some on a few very cool projects that are a lot like what we already have done in the product, but they're doing it in a much more clever way that's going to be a lot more scalable for us. And that's what I'm super stoked about is when we finally are able to get some of that stuff to light. So even like I mentioned, I do code and these are some of the things that I've been working on internally, right? And so so we're not quite ready to share those yet. A lot of the work has just been, let's make sure that things work and that we have enough bandwidth to test them. And that's really the thing, because like you buy a piece of software, you want to make sure it's not only going to work, but that someone's going to be there at the end of the day to help you with it if something goes wrong, and then at the same time that if there's anything that all the things that we say it's supposed to do, does it in all the situations that we say it's going to do, which requires a ton of testing.
As most customers discovered when they bought their M1s, and then I have a photo of a stack of like 150 M1s just sitting in a corner, right, where they can't use it because it just wouldn't work, right? And so it is about making this stuff work in the end, right? So, and then I would say, if no one's ever used an M2, right, like you need to go use one, because I have an M2 and it's like the fastest machine I've ever been on, right? Like it's
you got the Air.
I do. I have an M2 Air, and it's just like. And it was like $800 or $850 or something, on sale somewhere along the way. It's like $1,000 or something, but I got it when it was on sale somewhere, and I was like, this thing is better than my Intel 15-inch 7-core blah blah blah. It's like night and day, right? Like that thing is so fast. So you
get kind of used to it, right? You're just like, then you sit back onto an Intel or like an older machine, you're like, oh my god, how long does this take? Oh my goodness.
It's just not snappy, and I don't know, something about the color. I don't know. It's just the whole thing. The display is better. The snappiness it's just fast. I open as many things as I possibly can open, and it doesn't even act like I have anything open, right? Like I usually, if you load like 15 things and you're running everything, then when you go run that next thing, it goes, right? But no,
you hear the fan spin up. Yeah, that's the nice thing about it. I can sit on the back porch outside in the summertime with the thing on my lap for a full 8 hours. And still have half a battery at the end of the day.
Battery lasts forever. Yeah, battery. It's like having a phone, right? Like and
what's cool is how that translates to Fusion is like, we get all that benefit from the UI snappiness and some of the other cool stuff. So like on Linux, for example, we have full 3D accelerated graphics, and you need to have the newer kernel, like 5.19 or newer, and most distros that are on the edge, like 2210, 37, they have Fedora 37, they have that. And we have OpenGL 4.3 there, and it's using the host metal rendering graphic engine to do it. And man, it's snappy. Like there's not a lot of 3D games that are, you're going to be playing in Linux and whatnot, right? And certainly on ARM. But the benefit that you get is just the UI is just instant. Right? So like you can like drag the window and the display just resizes just like immediately as long as you have tools installed. So yeah, it's just the benefit of getting that platform.
So getting over to Workstation, I have to admit that I haven't used Windows 11 yet. I've been on 10, and I've been using 10 all over the place because we gave away these Max tanks for the experts, and I built code on 10 using Visual Studio. I did a lab in the US and Europe on how to write code for little sensors using, an interface, an I2C interface that you plug in your USB port. So I did a lot of Windows stuff this year, right? And spent a lot of time using Visual Studio, writing Windows code. And I got to say, Windows went through a downturn from like 9, 10, like it just, somewhere, I think whichever it was, where it was the touchscreen one, where it was like just not a good OS. Yeah, 8. I guess it was 8 and 9, which is not good. 10 is wonderful. 10, I feel like I'm back at like Windows 95. Like it works. It does what it says. The start menus are there. Everything behaves properly. So Windows has gotten really nice. I've gotten used to it, and
Windows 11 is still evolving too. That's the weird thing. Like even for like the screenshots that I took for Workstation when the few days earlier they'd released their 22H2 update for Windows 11, and I updated my Dell the night before, and suddenly Windows looked different, and I had to take all these screenshots because Windows looks different now because there's a new little search bar on the taskbar where the start menu goes.
Yeah. And so I would say that I'm torn between Mac and Windows now, because one of my Windows machines, I really like it. I like Visual Studio. I like their AI and their compiler, and their editor is really nice, and it's fun to work. It's fun to use, and everything behaves properly. Videos play right, audio is good, but then I get a M2 and I'm like, oh my god, this is so fast. Like so Workstation, traditional, what is the version of Workstation now synced up on 13 as well? Is that how we're doing that, or what are we?
Nah, we're on 17 there. 17. They're independent trains. We might align them at some point, but they're just numbers.
I can see a 20 in our future, right? Like maybe.
We'll just jump from 13 and 17 to 20.
And so obviously the use case there has just always been the same, right? Like be able to run different OSs on top of your Windows machine, right?
Right. And some of the cool things that we were able to add this year, include both Windows 11 host and guest support. We made some updates to the system that we use, which uses Microsoft's hypervisor framework. So the Microsoft WHP, their Windows hypervisor platform. So we did a bunch of things that users won't see, other than it works to basically run when Windows has some of these higher security modes like VBS and when like Hyper-V mode is turned on. So like WSL and things like that. So it took a lot of work, and we did it for Windows 10, and then things changed. We had to do it again for Windows 11. And then likewise, we brought the TPM in for Windows 11 guest support and OpenGL 4.3 there as well. But the use cases are always the same on Workstation. Not always the same, but they're the same as they always have been on Workstation. We haven't really been expanding that. Likewise, we've been working on some of those POCs, like I mentioned, around containers and things like that, and that's going to apply to Workstation when we get there. Workstation still does ship with vCuddle and the container runtime that that we innovated on in previous years, so that's still there.
It was interesting. Last week we had Graham Barker on, who talked about vCenter Converter, because vCenter Converter came out, and we had use cases where we were converting VMs to VMs, right? And you can use vCenter Converter, convert Workstation VM into ESX8, right? Or vSphere 8, right?
Yeah, format. And you shouldn't really need to do that. It should just work. But vCenter Converter does a lot of some of the heavy lifting to make sure that it's an appropriately converted copy, and not just like it runs and you have to sort of manually go in and change a bunch of the settings to apply for the new environment.
Also, you can change things, right? You can expand the size of the VM, and
Right. That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
But it was, it's like, oh yeah. Don't forget these VMs run across. You can have your 8 and your Workstation and your Fusion VM and the VMDK or whatever we call a container these days, or just a standard container across all platforms, right?
Yeah, very glad to see that project having continued, because that's one of the older, old school VMware projects that has been around since the early days. It was
Well,
back
we
when
we
P2V, right?
right. We joked after the podcast that they haven't changed any of the old icons. So the old icons are the old Windows, ESX, 3.0 type, icons. So if you want throwback, if you want to go
Retro.
back to, retro, that's the word I was looking for, retro. If you want to go back to retro and look at all the fun stuff, you can, because
Just fond
they
memories of
haven't.
this Sharp client.
Yeah. The Sharp client icons are all there, little arrows. It's like, oh, those are fun to look at.
And to
So.
this day, I still can't convince management that a C# client for vSphere is a good idea. But
Yeah, like a throwback, right? I like that. I do like the old interface. I like compiled software, right, in general. But on the
yeah, I
same
mean,
time, I use vSphere down a rack in San Jose because I have my own little rack cage that me and a buddy rent, and we put stuff in there and hack around on it. I got nothing serious in there, but nonetheless, I use ESX, and it's nice to just use a browser from home and just go
and
in
everything's right there.
right there.
Yeah, I feel like what's gonna, there's a lot of stuff that's sort of baking itself into the browser. The browser is the new operating system, essentially, right? Like, even as things go forward with like WASM, like WebAssembly, like it's kind of like a virtual machine inside of a web browser, right? And it runs a whole stack for you, and it's wild stuff. But I think that there's also going to be, or at least I hope, a sort of renaissance on the desktop with local desktop tooling. It's hard, but it was like super hard, and people like went through it and did it anyway because there was no other way to do it. When the web happened, and the web's like easy, and you can go really quickly, and everything's JavaScript, and a billion developers in the world know it, and you're good. But as I think desktop development patterns, like in the case of Windows,
Yeah.
WinUI 3, and like you said, all that cool Visual Studio Code, that stuff that makes it super easy to build these things nowadays. And on the same time, Apple has some huge features that they're putting into Xcode to help automate your testing and do all this, good code health practices. That I hope we see a renaissance there, where there's, more desire to bake native apps in and have them, work in combination with cloud services, where, you have an app that's local and it does stuff, but it's made better by cloud things. And instead of just putting everything in a web browser, or even like running a web browser locally via things like Electron, which, guilty, we did that as well, right? Like
Right.
with Fusion.
Right.
And we went down that road. And it just, I feel like there's something to be said about the elegance of a local native app, as well as the the performance and the security aspects of it.
Yeah.
And then, if you're looking at enterprise stuff, being able to deliver that and have it being managed using the same tools you use to manage, the desktop, to me, that's sort of where there's a lot of value there.
I look at my toolbar here at the bottom, right, and I'm like, okay, Zoom is now an app. You got the web client, but they got the app, and Slack has the web client, but it has the app, right? And so if you look at it, it has slowly, you build a web app, but then the next thing you know, you're building a local compiled app as well, right, to support it. And all the online games are that way. You got multiplayer games, but in the end, you're downloading a C compiled app, and then you're running League of Legends on your machine. Then you're connecting to the cloud for those services. So I can see that becoming a true hybrid kind of compiled app environment with cloud services.
I think in a similar vein, though, I also see a same kind of I don't want to say rejection of cloud, but migration, or at least the recognition that the cloud itself isn't the everything. And I think VMware's smart in terms of embracing the multi-cloud in this respect, but I feel like there's a lot of focus on the big clouds. And I think that there's just economies of scale that, it's quick for a startup to like throw down some Amazon and get going. But then like look at, for example, Twitter, right? Like the amount of bandwidth that engine requires. There's no way that their cost could be managed using using a cloud service. And of course, not every company in the world is Twitter, and no one's that big besides them in a sense, but or a few people are. But I think that there's other organizations that are saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with having your own computers to do these things. And in fact, it might be better to do that in some cases, whether it's for security reasons or whether it's just for manageability reasons, right? Like, and so I
Yeah,
think
that
as
gets
servers get more and more powerful, and you need that sense of ownership, I feel like there's going to be a resurgence in running your own systems for things too.
yeah, it's a different conversation than what we were talking about, but it is along those same lines, right? Like, what we're talking about is local clients, which I like because it's compiled software that runs really fast, right? But then there is connecting a cloud service, which is okay, cloud versus client. Then there's my cloud or my systems in my data center, which is my own private cloud versus public cloud, right? So
Sure. Yeah.
that, yeah.
It's to
So
me
workstation,
the association is like the sense of ownership around it, but
yeah,
totally agree.
totally. So Workstation 17 out, part of the bundle, 1 distributed bits, so I could get my x86, my Workstation, my Fusion all delivered. Click and go pick that up, and $100, and I get that both in the package, and the license works across both of them. Geez, I'm trying to think what else we need to know here.
Well, some of the things are we have this new SNS thing. It's not really new, but a lot of folks know about it. But basically, this support and subscription option where you can add one of the 3 tiers. And
I saw that on the deal on Friday, right? Like,
right.
I'll tell you a story. We're bundling for VMUG Advantage. We're bundling that with vSphere 8. You pay $180 and you get your vSphere 8 1-year license. Well, for the Black Friday deal, I went in to look, because I was thinking about buying an ESX license, because that ESX license you buy for like $400 lasts forever. Right. Mm-hmm. So if I've got a server in my rack in San Jose and I'm using these year licenses, but I don't know whether I'm going to be at VMware for that much longer, maybe I go buy a license that'll last like 10 years, right? And just can run it with it versus having these 1-year one-ups, right? Mm-hmm. But I notice on the pricing, they offer in the Black Friday, the 1-year subscription, right? Which turns out is only for vSphere is only like $240 or something, which is very close to the same price I pay for my Advantage, which gets me the vSphere 8 license in Advantage, right? Now, it was interesting to see that we have gone to this like half price model if you're willing to do the subscription once a year. Gig.
Yeah, agreed. And the VMUG Advantage is a great program, and I think we're included in there as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they've updated the keys for 13 yet, but if not, talk to me. Let's do it.
Yeah. I'll check that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it happens automatically. I think it does, but if not, whatever. We can get it there. But yeah, I think, the cool thing is about the subscription is basically with the SNS, when you add it on, you get any major upgrade that we do. And as well, it gives you like phone support where you can call in and actually get help if you get stuck. And
right, you do get support.
We'll take your help. Yeah. Like we monitor the communities and we try to do the best that we can there, but we got to write code at the same time, so we can't follow every single post that happens in there. It drives me might. And so yeah, it gives them ability to get that help. And for 1 or 3 years, depending on the term that you pick, you get those major version upgrades. So if we release, version 14, you get that as long as your subscription's active. So that's how most corporations buy it, because if they buy it from a channel partner, that's part of standard VMware process. And so that means they don't got to worry about every year coming in and checking a box to give us their $99. That just sort of is part of their subscription. So yeah, it's a way of trying to do both. I don't know. I'm very interested in what folks' opinions are about subscription, and if that's something that they like or something that they not. I hear sort of both sides of that argument, and we're definitely always open to trying to make sure that we can satisfy what customers willingness is to pay and those requirements are if they have OpEx needs versus CapEx, right?
Yeah, CapEx I was going to say CapEx versus OpEx. For individual buyers like ourselves, it doesn't matter. But for enterprises where you're buying 10,000 licenses or something big like that, it makes a big difference whether it's OpEx or CapEx. So yeah, and then just how they're set up to bill, right? Like they might be moving to the everything subscription. I know that we announced, I'm not really supposed to talk about earnings very much, but we announced earnings last week. I think we have a week to talk about it or something like that before we're not supposed to talk anymore. But they did say that our subscription revenue is like 30% of our total revenue now. So it must be popular enough, right? Yeah. Must be something that the enterprises are just comfortable with doing. So
yeah, it's a more predictable billing model, right? And it makes sense for a lot of organizations there as they switch over their budget buckets and they move to this model where it also gives them choice and they're not locked into a big 10-year thing, or they hadn't spend bajillions amounts of money into a specific architecture, they can continually evolve. And at the same time, it takes away a bunch of the burden of some of that management off of their overhead. So that's
So
a benefit too.
I know we're running out of time to have you here, but one of the questions I have, because you do help manage the project, from our perspective, we see I go buy a license, my buddy gets a license, we buy onesie, twosie licenses. Do you actually work with enterprises where they come in, and do you ever actually pitch at the briefing center or whatever? Like, here's how it works. It's what is, and it's because it's going to be like 1,000 license sale or something like that. Do you get big purchases coming through
Yeah,
enterprise?
we're kind of 50-50 to be honest. Without giving away the goat or nothing like that, it's pretty split. And so we do. I don't. It's been a while since I've been in a VBC, particularly since I don't live in Palo Alto
COVID
anymore.
for the rest of the world.
But and what ends up happening is it sort of comes up organically. It's not like a C level top down thing. It's more of like, hey, we use these product, and then so what ends up coming to me is like, hey, we're trying to manage them by the thousand. Like, how can we handle that and whatnot? So that's where I sort of get involved. I don't really pitch too much. That sort of comes into us.
Yeah, I just never think about it from an enterprise. I'm always like, oh yeah, me and my buddy, and you can buy it at the Apple Store or online.
Yeah, usually what happens is like there's a deal going on, and it's like, oh, Mike, we need you real quick. Like, you need to tell us about this workstation thing they asked about it. And it's like the very last thing to close this deal.
Yeah, it's the last thing on the list, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. That's what some guy like Eric wants to hear about.
But you know what? We're on the list.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Well, I know that it's 1:02 here. We got started late, but Mike, it's always fun to have you here on the show. As always, great job, good work, sticking to it for all this time. As I use my Mac and all my friends use my Mac, we will pay homage to VMware for making that happen, because it's nice to be able to run a Windows thing now and then.
I'm so grateful for the team and what we've been able to achieve. So and by the same token, in areas where we're short, let us know. We're listening. We definitely want to make sure we're doing better. So hit me up on the Twitters if we're still there at Mike Roysoft. I'm also on Mastodon and at Mike Roysoft. I think on fosstodon.org. That's a whole other discussion.
I haven't gone to Fosstodon yet. I have to go. Probably need to go get that set up.
It's a much smaller place, but there's, I think, a lot. The discussion's really nice.
Interesting. All right, I'll go check that out. Michael Roy, thanks for being on the show. We'll be back again next week. Go get some barbecue. It's lunchtime. We're kind of out of time, so unless you got a great barbecue report, we'll end it here.
Oh my God, I just got a new grill, and when I moved to the house, and I got this like charbroil. It's what they call it, infrared. And it's basically like there's this like extra layer of steel in between the heat elements that are coming up the gas pipe holes and the grill. And so it means that you don't end up with any flame coming up.
Yeah, you just
pure heat. I've been barbecuing stuff like twice a week for months now, and I'm in such a pain.
All right, so if I assume I have you for another few minutes here, because you don't have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. Okay, cool. We'll do a V barbecue report then, because that sounds interesting. First off, when you say you moved, I noticed that your office is a little different. There's no more guitars. Did you what's the deal with a move? Did you?
No, the guitars have their own room now. It's great. I don't have to share an office with my guitars.
You got a new house, or
I did. So yeah, I moved out of the Bay Area apartment living, and we bought a house just outside of Sacramento. So in a little unincorporated area of California called Fair Oaks, and it's the same little town that Gavin Newsom lives.
Oh, there you go.
We're neighbors, buddies.
That reminds me of Thousand Oaks, but that's down in LA. So yeah, Fair Oaks, good place.
Yeah, so we're like an hour from Tahoe or whatever. So we got a tree in the backyard. I got an orange tree. We got olive trees. I'm brining olives these days. So
will get warm in the summer too, right? Like real warm, right?
Oh,
Because in the Bay Area we kind of get warm-ish, but
it got to 118 one day here.
Nice.
It was crazy, but we have a pool, and that makes all the difference in the world. So that was a big thing. So yeah, we got having the place now where we're finally able to get a barbecue, and so yeah, this one was just the store or whatever, and not having that flame come up, just consistent barbecuing on everything all the time. So I'm just, it's like the nicest barbecue ever. Super fan.
That's nice. Now, are you going to put in a pool somewhere too? Are you going to have a barbecue?
We have the pool. So they put in the pool like 2 or 3 years, or 3 years before we moved in. So, they loaded that all up and then took off.
You're good to go. So you're out barbecuing by the pool, with a flameless, barbecue kind of flameless, right? And there you go. Now you just that's good. I finally got a smoker, right? So I've been smoking lately, but fun times. That's
Oh,
great.
nice.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I haven't gotten into the smoker yet. Buddy of mine is super into doing briskets and whatnot, and we had like a cowboy adventure because I am a pirate in my spare time and also a cowboy in my spare time. We dress up and do all these events and stuff like that. So we had this cowboy cook-off thing, and I won the rifle competition, but whatever.
Nice. Yeah.
And but yeah, like we were smoking brisket all day long, and yeah, I'm a big fan. I just haven't gotten in there yet.
Yeah. I'm still playing with the different pellet types, and getting that down, and deciding how long I want to actually smoke stuff. But I smoke fish. I smoke some fresh caught fish. My daughter's fiance goes fishing out in the lakes. He sunk his boat not too long ago for fun, right?
Oh boy,
your way up in the Delta, right? It's
yeah.
all. Yeah. It was an aluminum fishing boat. It wasn't like a massive, sink a yacht or anything, but I think they had like 5 cases of beer, and then 5 guys in like a 20-foot, open aluminum fish. And they took a corner too much and caught the back corner, and it filled with water. And then it started to do a wheelie. And then 2 of the guys who were up in front panicked and jumped out. And that was it. The whole thing went, beep, and then just, right. Yeah.
I thought you were first going to tell me like, oh, they like put it underwater so that like the sea life could grow around it. They do at some coral areas. Like, no, they were just drinking.
They were just drinking, right? And they dug it out. They got the boat back, but the engine was done, so they had to go by. It was just an outboard, whatever, 20 horsepower.
Yeah, so we're right by the Natoma Dam and like Lake Natoma and the American River, so we're like stone's throw from there. So we've been getting out of the water a bunch.
They had got something, I forget what they caught, but we smoked it. One of the days, smoked it, did like an 8-hour smoke, and that stuff was so good, right? We brined it first, so it gets like a brine salty, and then you smoke that at low temp, like 110 or something, and just let it go for like 6-7 hours. And it reminds you, if you've ever bought smoked fish at the grocery store, it comes it's
pre-smoked.
Pretty much that. Yeah, it was smoked,
sweet.
orange color. Yeah,
I've been brining olives. That's been my brining experience. We got a couple of olive trees here, so I've got like 3 batches. One,
right? You have to do that, right? You have to brine. That's how you prepare olives.
Yeah. Right? You can't eat them off the tree. They're awful. Right. They're the worst thing ever.
Well, they're poisonous, I think, also.
No, they just have this like stuff in they call it olive purin, and it's like bitter. Like you can't like take a bite without spitting it out, basically. So you use the salt brine to wash that out, basically, and it leaches, and then you do the salt brine with like flavor and stuff like that. So I've got a couple of jars that are just like another 3-4 days to go until their flavors have all consumed and they're ready to eat. But it's been a process, man. It's really fun. This like slow motion, whether it's smoking or slow cooking or brining and stuff and preserving. It's neat stuff.
A buddy has a olive orchard in Italy, in Tuscany, right? And he's got black olive trees, and then he presses and makes a dark olive oil out of it. And so it's a process, but he's very proud. Do you have olive trees then? How many trees?
Yeah. So there's, I think I got 3 trees around here basically. And so some of them are they're different varieties. But the difference between like a black olive and a green olive is only the amount of time that they've stayed on the vine. They're not differentiated in a species sense. There are like special differentiation, like don't get me wrong. Sure. But you can like have a manzanella black or a manzanella green.
Just how long
Kalamata black or Kalamata green. Yeah, so like ours are bigger, so they're more like cocktail olives. But we have another tree that's nearby that's got the smaller olives, and they're all like super black, but they will harden, and they'll get black and they'll still stay hard. Whereas the ones that I'm brining, by the time they get black, they're kind of soft and they're not quite there.
And believe it or not,
it's a little bit of both.
I am late for my next meeting, so I'm gonna have to go. We're gonna have to go. Michael Roy, thanks a lot for being here. Go get some barbecue, guys, and we'll see you again next week, Wednesday. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Michael. My friend. Cheers.
Cheers.